All right, folks, let us celebrate the 25th anniversary of Battle Royale. Now, I know, for those who probably stumble onto this video here, probably thinking, why are we talking about Battle Royale? That's not a horror. It's an action movie. It's a thriller. It's not a horror movie. I would argue that it's, to quote, Ricardo, it's a societal horror, right? And there are elements that I would actually admit kind of leans towards slasher films, in my opinion, right? Just the way how the kills are, and that's the conceit of it all, right? Which I'll get into it a bit. It's very slasher film-like, right? And especially how it plays with audience expectations, right? But I'll get to that in a bit, right? So, as we always do with, with these retrospective reviews, we have to talk about, the first time that we saw this film, right? So for me, right, when it came to Battle Royale, right, I was introduced to this film in the mid-2000s, right? It was just always this film that I always heard about at the time, just like you, Ricardo, I was deep into anime, especially ones that we were able to view online, not the ones that would show on local TV or cable, right? So this is around the time that we were watching Naruto and Bleach and stuff like that, right? So we were always just seeking out the newest anime, right? In the back of our heads, we were always the back of our mind, we was always hearing about, or at least in my case, I was always hearing about this battle royale thing, right? I believe it was just a term that was just sort of coined, while we were watching wrestling shows like WWE and stuff like that, right? And it's a term that's still used to say, right?
It's a popular game mode or something.
Exactly, and it's in video games as well. Right,
free for all.
A free for all thing, right? So you always heard the term, but you just always heard about the movie and like, oh, what is this movie about, right? And when you did, like in my case, I did some digging up online, I realized, oh wow, this is a Japanese movie based off of a novel, and it's controversial. Okay. But then at the time too, I was very deep into cult films, right? So that was where I got my introduction to films like The Evil Dead and Eraserhead and stuff like that, right? So I was just enamored by the idea that, oh, there were these movies that didn't make a lot of money in the box office, but there was something charming about them, something very offbeat, very unconventional, right? And over time they just grew this cult following, right? So in my research and just learning a lot about cult films, I ran once again into Battle Royale, right? So in the 2000s, I got the chance to see for myself, right? I was like, oh, that's why this movie was controversial. When I mean controversial, I mean that it was not so much banned in Japan, but it sparked a lot of debate in its home country. But it was banned in other countries, not just because of the violence, but because of the implied violence that they thought that would spring up of it, right? And when you get into the premise, which involves 42 high school kids who are put on this island and they are forced to fight to the death, basically kill themselves, right? Where to the point that there must be one victor, and if there is no victor at the end of this 3-day battle, then everybody dies, right? Yeah, I mean, that premise alone is not just alluring and intriguing, but it's very provocative, though, you know what I mean? And it's one that I imagine rubbed people off the wrong way, especially a lot of conservatives, right? So yes, I'm not surprised that it was banned in other countries, right? But what I didn't know, but I found this out after the fact, is that it impacted its release in other countries, right? So you didn't really see it released theatrically in other countries, but it just sort of popped up in some film festivals and it sort of made its rounds online. That's how I was able to see it, right? But it was only, I believe, in 2010 when Anchor Bay Films, right? Which is a subsidiary of Starz, right? Yeah, they were the ones who officially released this, right? And they released the special edition, which is basically a director's cut of it, right? Another thing I didn't even know of, right? This is one of the rare films in Japan that had a R15 plus rating. So what that means is that it's the equivalent of a PG-13 rating, but it's a darker version of that, right? Where it's basically saying individuals 15 years and under absolutely cannot watch this film. You can have parental guidance, yes, but this is not for 15 and under. They are not supposed to watch this at all, right? So it's kind of like a weird version of an NC-17 rating in a sense when you think about it, but it's specifically towards teens. It's just saying, teens, y'all are not supposed to watch this at all. And it makes sense because, yeah, I mean, it's about teens, right? And that adds to the controversy controversy of the film itself, right? So yes, I mean the easiest show to compare this to is my favorite film of all time. That would be A Clockwork Orange, right? Where it explores juvenile delinquency. It's about teens who are doing these violent acts upon each other, right? I mean, yeah, that will rub people off the wrong way, right? So it's controversial. It's controversy. It's rightfully deserved, right? But you know, when you hear controversy or controversial films, you tend to think, oh, that means that this movie is unwatchable and you're not supposed to watch this. But I would argue that, you know, a film like this, you could absolutely watch it. Like once you get past this premise, yeah, you could sit through it though. I mean, yes, the violence is shocking, but it is never gratuitous. It's not too gratuitous, right? And it's not like it's not like you know, it's not The Human Centipede or a Serbian film.
No. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not that level of violence. So what I will say though, right, and this is the biggest compliment I could give this, right, is what's really so fascinating about this show, right, for me, is the time that it was released, right? And this is from just me learning about cult films and learning about Japanese films, right? Is that during that whole late 90s to early 2000s era, yeah, there was some very, very, very provocative Japanese films, right? And one of the filmmakers that came out of that was a guy by the name of Takashi Miike, right? Who put out, I would say, two of the most grisly films ever made, right? One being Audition, which I still have yet to see. Even though I know it's great,
I'm scared.
I just heard that the climax is all sorts of.
I'm scared.
Yeah. I know. Yeah, me too.
I'm a big chicken baby. I like because Audition is one of those movies that I know by reputation because I remember that like some of my favorite horror directors have said like, "Wow, Audition goes so hard," and I'm like, I don't want. I'm it's one of those I've got to get myself in just the right headspace for it because otherwise, I'm scared. I'm a big chicken baby.
No, I don't blame you. I don't blame you, right? So I'll just wrap up my preamble here, right? But yeah, I would say the biggest compliment I could give Battle Royale, though, in terms of its content, is that it pales in comparison to what I think is probably one of the biggest FUBAR movies ever made, in my opinion, and it also comes from Takashi Miike. And believe it or not, folks, it's a show that I actually own on DVD because, true story, when I was in the States back in 2011, I went to the New York Comic Con and it was just there in a bin and I bought it. I mean, I am glad that I owned it because I actually saw the film during the 2000s as well, right? As a show that always stuck with me, right? But yeah, it is one of the most FUBAR movies ever made. That would be Ichi the Killer. If you have a strong stomach, yes, watch that film. If you do not have a strong stomach, do not watch that movie. That's the best way I could sum it up. But yeah, Ichi the Killer is a depraved, fucked up movie. Doing the violence in that, the level of violence, boy. OMFG, boy. Wow, boy. And it is just as controversial as this movie. Yeah? But again, when you watch Battle Royale and you were to compare that to Ichi Killer, it's like, wow, like Battle Royale is nothing though. Like, you know, like it's nothing compared to that, right? But the point I'm getting at this though is that it's just that period in the late 90s to early 2000s, right? Where Japanese filmmakers just came out and said, yeah, we're just gonna come out and we're gonna channel that same energy that Stanley Kubrick and Ken Russell and Sam Peckinpah did in the early 70s with films like The Devils and Straw Dogs and A Clockwork Orange, where, listen, rating be damned. We want to tell this story and we believe in it. Yes, it's gonna rub people off the wrong way, but we believe wholeheartedly in this story. It's gonna upset you, but trust me, we need to make this, right? I'll get to my last point, right? So I was like literally a few days old, right? Because I actually recapped this a few days ago, where I was reminded of who actually directed this movie here, right? And it would be a guy by the name of Kinji Fukasaku, right? Who I didn't know about his work till like about a couple of years ago, where I decided to watch, and I would recommend this if you're a fan of both crime films and Yakuza films. Battle Without Honor and Humanity. This is a 5-part series that he put out between 1973 and 1977, right? Yeah, one of the best Yakuza series ever, right? But yeah, that's like Battle Royale It is grimy, it is violent, it is brutal, very bleak in terms of the worldview that it shows, right? But in that case, with those films, it was Kinji just saying, look, I am young, I am just gonna bring my energy to it. I'm gonna show violence at a level that you never saw it before. It's kind of tame by today's standards, but when you see it, you get that visceral energy in it, right? But yeah, when I saw this movie and I saw it was that guy, I was like, oh, it's that guy, right? But then I was also reminded that this was the last film that he ever put out when he was alive. Because when he got to work on its sequel, Requiem, he just worked on one scene and he died. And his son had to step in, right? Kenta, that's his name. Kenta had to come in pretty much, and he co-wrote the script, by the way, right? And he pretty much had to direct this movie. And yes, even though I never saw Requiem, I always heard about how bad it was. Like, it peels in comparison to this one. It just dropped the ball, basically, right? At least I give Kenta credit for at least following in his father's footsteps. So I can't be mad at that, right? But I'll get to this point later on when we touch into the show itself, right? Is really Kinji's energy that he brought to this movie. And the mere fact that this is his final film, though, really made this film special for me, boy. And that's why, for me, I ended up loving this film way more than I did when I first saw it. Because when I first saw it, the first couple of times, I was like, yeah, I mean, the show is great and I enjoy it, right? But it was never a show that I bothered to rewatch it up until I heard about its anniversary, right? You know? So yeah, reluctantly, I made the effort to check it in. I added it to the schedule. And boy, am I so glad that I checked this movie out, right? But more on that later, right? So as I take a little break, as I take a little water break, if you will, Ricardo, if you don't mind, you could just share your history with Battle Royale, and you can let me know if you saw the sequel or care to see the sequel at all. But yeah, your initial thoughts on the film and how you look at it now.
Yeah, for me, it was, I was not familiar with it at all until the trailer for Hunger Games came out. And everybody was comparing it to Battle Royale, got Battle Royale. So I seeked it out and just saw it and like, oh yeah, right. So that was my introduction to it in that sense. I wasn't like familiar with it as a cult film or anything like that. Just everybody on Reddit was comparing it to Battle Royale. Like I look it up and like that's the main reason I knew. I had no other reason. And then yeah, it's like, oh right, it is a classic. It does work up as it is. And then eventually you see Hunger Games. I'm like, all right, I mean that's fine, but it nowhere near as good as this film. Yeah, people was correct about that, right? It was very, the crowd was right in that example. And yeah, I just remember it as just this kind of film. You could see why it's a cult film, why it works. You know, again, you mentioned that Takeshi Miike, like that whole aspect of just this gonzo crazy aspect of it. We'll talk about this, but it took me a hot minute to pick up that the girl is the same girl from Kill Bill. I was like, oh shit, it's her. Like, I wonder if this is where she get this is kind of the soft audition she had for her role in Kill Bill from Tarantino, because that came out like a few years after this, right? When this film came out,
Probably.
2000.
Yeah, 2000.
You're right. So it's probably that. Like, I don't know, but she was great at this. So I was like, oh, you're right. She just kind of played the same character. You wondered if it's the same person, right? But she can't be, right? But it alternate reality, right? But yeah, that's how I know about the film. It remained a classic. I understand why people love it, but I didn't get into it when it came out. It's only because of the Hunger Games. I did backtracking and checking it. And I just made sure.
Right. And it's a good thing that you mentioned Hunger Games, right? Because, yeah, believe it or not, I actually saw Battle Royale before Hunger Games, before I even knew what Hunger Games was, right? So when they announced the movie, I was like, oh, so it's like, but I didn't say the movie copied Battle Royale. I would say the book copied Battle Royale, right? And yeah, I went to see it because at the time I was admittedly on the Jennifer Lawrence hype train. I kind of regret it now, but in the 2010s, I would admit it was. I was sorry. It was Silver Lion's Playbook. It was that movie. That movie. Sorry, but the show maybe part of the hype train, if you will, right? But whatever. But yeah, I saw that film. Just quickly on the series, the second one remains the best, in my opinion. I didn't need the 2-part third entry. I didn't need that at all. I remember seeing both parts. I think I saw the first part theatrically and the second part at home, and I was like, oh, that's how it ends, okay. And didn't care to see the prelude, the prequel that came out couple of years ago. I didn't care for that at all because at the time I
Oh
didn't care
God.
about that show again. I mean, yes, Rachel Zegler's in it, but I really don't care to see it at all. Okay, at the time I just sort of tuned out of Hunger Games. But yes, in the mid 2010s, Hunger Games was the shit, right? But it just amuses me at that time that people were like, oh, that movie is ripping off Battle Royale, right? And yeah, a lot of people didn't even know what Battle Royale was until that franchise even started off. When that movie franchise started off, right? So it's really interesting how that one American film or film franchise, brought more attention to the movie and the book to an extent than the book for the Hunger Games did, in my opinion, right? That's really interesting, right? But yeah, lastly, CC, yes, you are, now initiated into the amazing world of
Yes.
Battle Royale. So you could just share, how just how you found out about the show in the first place, and yeah, what sort of motivated you outside of just me mentioning, the film celebrated its 25th anniversary. Yeah, what really motivated you to watch this film for yourself?
So there were a couple things going on. I feel like my origin story is kind of an overlap between the two of you because I got into film through cult film circles, right? So you can't really move in cult film circles without hearing about Battle Royale, especially since at the time, like as you're flagging, there's this like the kind of Asian hyperviolence cinema thing going on at the moment in the early 2000s, because we also forget Old Boy comes out around the same time, and that's kind of the movie that for a lot of people is. Some people kind of argue now that trend was a little overblown, and it was less that there were a lot of hyperviolent movies coming out of Japan and South Korea at the time, and more that there were a lot of those films getting distribution in the States. But at the same time, there was a very particular movement going on at the time, and so as a result, there's a lot of discussion about it. But then, as Ricardo points out, when The Hunger Games comes out in 20, and I was just pulling up the dates because I was curious, but yeah, The Hunger Games comes out in 2012, 12 years after Battle Royale has come out, but around the time that Battle Royale is coming to the States with the Anchor Bay release. And what's interesting, and you could almost make the argument if you were conspiratorially minded, that the hype around the book and the movie might have been what provided the momentum for the Battle Royale release in the States on physical media. But I know that when Hunger Games came out, there were a lot of people being like, I liked this better when it was Battle Royale. I think Tarantino, of all people, kind of led the charge on that. Tarantino was very critical of the Hunger Games. And very much this is just right. Well, I mean, this is a man who has kind of taken being a filmmaker and turned it into professionally having opinions. Derogatory. And that got me curious, obviously, because Hunger Games is a project that I am frustrated by, both as a book and as a movie. Specifically, I mean kind of as franchises, because I actually think that The Hunger Games is a very good self-contained premise, but then making it into a whole franchise is kind of where it falls apart for me. Right. I am more skeptical. People who say that it's a knockoff, I disagree with, because we forget this, but Battle Royale comes out before The Hunger Games, and The Hunger Games comes out in the book comes out whenever it does. But we forgetting that Stephen King wrote a very similar idea in 1979 under the name Richard Bachman with the book The Long Walk, which is again a similar concept of a dystopian future where teenagers are forced to compete in a lethal sport of some kind. But what I think is interesting about that is that very much that these ideas are kind of floating in our cultural mind, right? This premise. And I would even flag Ender's Game as another kind of, I mean, it's not quite competitive sport, but Ender's Game also has similar DNA of child soldiers, teenagers who are put into combat situations. And I actually think that the book Ender's Game is quite horrifying. I think where Ender's Game and Hunger Games fall apart, but where Battle Royale, except for, we'll get to that, and The Long Walk succeed is that The Long Walk and Battle Royale are self-contained. I think part of the reason I haven't seen Requiem, I think that a big part of the reason people can be a little more critical of Requiem is because Battle Royale is a very self-contained art object. And with both Hunger Games and Ender's Game, they both get spun off into franchises, and I feel like it kind of defeats the purpose. If you're going to tell this sort of story, it needs to be a self-contained horror story, because you were talking earlier about violence and talking about how people debate about this movie a little bit, like, is it an action film? That gets back into like my getting into the film, where like I had heard the vibe I had kind of heard was that it was kind of an action film, and I finally sat down and watched it. I don't know why, but like, well, it was a couple things. A lot of people were talking about it being its anniversary. Through the library I work at, I had access to it, and I finally sat down with it and I said, "Oh, this isn't an action movie. This is a horror film. This is not fun." Because with a movie like Hunger Games, one of the reasons that the Hunger Games doesn't work very well for me is that this is a dystopian film about teenagers being forced to fight to the death for the amusement of the super wealthy in a future where society has collapsed. Nothing about this premise should be fun or exciting. This should not be a fun movie. This should be a horrifying movie. This should be the kind of thing that is disturbing and upsetting. I think that when you look at the Hunger Games, and because being, and it's not like, and I didn't live in the States at the time in 2012, but I was a little more connected to what was going on in America via the internet, and my wife was in the States at the time. And so from that perspective, I think it's really interesting that a lot of the discourse around Hunger Games wasn't, wow, this is so disturbing. It was inane conversations like, okay, but if I was in the Hunger Games, here's how I would survive. Or, oh, but who should she choose, Peeta or Gale, right? No one is having those types of conversations about Battle Royale. I haven't seen a single person be like, oh, if I was in the Battle Royale, here's how I would survive, if that makes sense. And I think that that's what I appreciate about the movie the most, if that makes sense. Like, I really appreciate this as a focused, watching it after all these years and after all these, especially since it's a film that, like, when I finally sat down to watch it, I was a little worried that it was going to be overhyped. Like, I'm like, okay, this movie's been around for so long. People have been talking about this for ages as this masterpiece. Does it live up to the way it's discussed? And it does. For me, it is an absolute stone cold classic, and we'll get into some of that later, and we'll get into some of the reasons why. But I think that the thing that just off the gate that I appreciate about it is that comparing it to works like Ender's Game, and especially the Hunger Games, that it is compared to the most, the strength that Battle Royale has is that it is a focused story, and it focuses on the horror. There are so many moments in Battle Royale where they could have made it more, like, there's moments in the film that are exciting, but there's not really any moments in the film that are fun. There's moments in the film that are thrilling, but there's not really moments that are like, I don't know. It's the difference between the kind of movies that Schwarzenegger was starring in the 80s versus Sam Peckinpah's movies. You know, it's the difference between Tombstone and The Wild Bunch. To use another example, there's a difference between action and violence.
Yes.
If that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think that what I love about Battle Royale is that Battle Royale is a violent movie. It is a violent, messy, gory movie, but it is not an action film. And discovering that was actually one of the most pleasant discoveries of the year for me, and getting to see it on its 25th anniversary was exciting for that reason. A big part of the motivation was this podcast, because I know we kind of talked about doing an episode. Well, I had pitched the idea because I had discovered that the film had an anniversary, and I was looking for an excuse to watch it, and then finally sitting down with it and going, Matthew, we got to talk about that. We got to talk about Battle Royale.
Yeah, we and I thank you for that, because at first I was like, would I have the time? Do I really have the time?
Right.
And at the time of us recording this, you know, the theatrical release is already gone in the States. I think they only ran it for 3 days. I think it's from the 11th to the 13th. Does it make sense?
Yeah,
but I was like, yeah, it kind of does make sense to still talk about it. Like, it's still a masterpiece, you know? Yeah. All right. Well, I just wrote down some general thoughts on the film after rewatching it, right? But before I get to those, because those are just more like notes that I'm gonna be just saying out loud. Ricardo, if you don't mind, you could just can you please share your general thoughts on Battle Royale? You know, seeing it now after all these years.
Watching it over, it totally holds up. As I said, I forgot that the big surprise was the girl who was Orenishi. Sorry, not Orenishi.
No, go go
Uh,
go
the
go. From Kill Bill
Go
Volume
Go,
One.
yeah,
Yeah,
Go Go,
that
Go
was
from
that
Kill
was
Bill,
my
correct?
yeah. I saw well, on a side note, I saw Kill Bill Volume One, which is slight spoiler.
In theaters,
Also
yeah,
gonna be on
yeah,
my best of lists. Wink wink.
right.
Um, but yeah, I was introduced to that actress, in that film, and
And
then
that, right.
then I saw Battle Royale. I was like, oh, same girl, because I noticed the eyes. I was like, oh, right, it's it.
Yeah, it's in
Hmm.
Yeah. So yeah, it's just to see who it is as a surprise. Like, oh, I don't know, make the connection. And but yeah, this movie totally holds up. It's a great conceit. It sets it up really well. Between this and like the one thing, like at the time, I was very aware of The Ring, and then for some reason I was not of this film. So it was interesting enough, and I just watching the camera and how the color correction and how the that Japanese era stuff. I was like, oh yeah, it
That's what
reminds
did
me
Yes.
of
you, did you ring or ringu?
Ringu, sorry,
Right.
yeah. But
And
Okay.
you
you're
you
Ringu, yeah.
actually hit the nail on the head though, because I was thinking about that with while I was rewatching this movie, and it reminded me of Itchy the Killer as well too. That sort of like film sort of VHS kind of look that those films kind of have,
Yeah.
sort of muted
Right,
tones and
yeah.
whatnot. Yeah, I had a look
Well,
at
it,
it.
it's
Hmm.
it's if I remember correctly, I get into my tech bag here, but it was basically what like I think Fujifilm dominated at the time. Um,
Mhm.
Hmm.
yeah, in terms of like how it looked now, they had a specific look. And well, the big sticking point is that they were kind of ahead of the curve in terms of like darker skin tones and that kind of stuff now. Like so, that's where
Mm.
that technology evolved. With respect to that, but yeah, it had a great look, especially when stuff getting all where they want make everything all doomy and gloomy. And it had that look, and it just had me remind me of that. And then, yeah, just watching over the movie, how the characters, the kind of decisions they make, why it went the way it did, and the ending is great. And I just movie totally holds up. Great film. Big fan of it, and don't super love it, but like it is at the time. If I saw this at the time, like if I saw this in 2001 or whatever, I'd have loved this movie. I'd have really loved this movie. It's a shame that I saw it so late. Because by then I was like, well, I saw other action things and beats in cinema at that point, so it didn't really wow me as much as other people say they do. But it's a solid film. It's a classic. It's an understandable classic.
Mhm.
Right, understood. So notes time, right? I'm not gonna spend too long on the notes, just stuff
Yep.
that I wrote practically for about an hour after I watched this film, right? Yeah, no, I just had one thing I love about this show though is that it just leaves you thinking, right? It's not just about, oh, I saw this
Yes.
character got shot or stabbed or whatever it is. No, it's the why, right? Like the show is the what,
Mhm.
just like Kill Bill Volume 1 and 2. What like the first volume is the what, second volume is the why, right? Like the film itself, what you see here
Mhm.
is the what, right? But this is the why that really leaves you thinking, right? So for me, surface level wise, right? Like many survival movies, this is a film where characters are put in this, very extreme situation, and they kind of learn about themselves, right? And who they love or hate or whatever. So like when their lives on the line, they have to make these crucial decisions, but they're usually emotionally driven, right? I just love the fact that because it's centered on high school kids, the deaths are kind
Yes.
of pretty much based on petty shit. You know what I mean? So like case in point, Mitsuko,
Yes.
right? Who is a standout character in this film, right? There's a quote, the great Cardi B, she is pretty and petty as fuck, boy. She just picks off one girl after the other because either they wrong her when she was in school or they just team up with somebody who just wanted to
Man.
get rid of her. So like it had one moment in particular where some girl was accusing Mitsuko of stealing her boyfriend. He's like, oh, it's like that. Well, all right, well, fuck you, blow. And I just kill her like that, though. It's real petty shit, but it makes a lot of sense, though. And
Mhm.
fun fact, something I didn't even know about. I think this is the reason why it rubbed the Japan itself the wrong way, or at least the government at the time, right? Remember, I mean, just historically, uh Japanese cinema is so interesting though, because just how transgressive their cinema has been over the decades since like the 70s,
Right.
right? Like just the stuff that they were able to get away with, right? But the mere fact that this movie, right, which doesn't even have sex in it, right, was able to just rub the government off the wrong way, right? And I think I know why. And I found this out after the fact, right? If I'm not mistaken, most, if not all, of the actors who play these kids are 15 years old. And that just
Mm.
adds a deeper layer to everything that you're seeing here, no? It's not like, they are nearing 18 or 17.
Right.
So when a guy pulls out a katana, it's like, oh well, he's a grown man, he could do this. Like, no, these are kids though, still. Yeah.
Yeah, that'll be a big factor, because I forget which year they passed a big law about that whole underage thing. Okay, that people like kind of start careers, and then their careers kind of stall out because they start their career too underage.
Got it.
I forget when. It's like, I think 2005 or something like that. Japan passed a big law about that. So yeah, that would be like a big shocking thing, for the show, because even Japan still had a moral outrage started to build up over underage stuff now. So it's like that. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, and before we get back to the show, right? So you can imagine how hard Kinji fought though, in terms of just saying no, don't understand what I'm trying to say here, John. I'm not doing this to piss the government off, even though it kind of is in a way. But listen, I'm trying to make a point here. I'm not doing this to like just shit over everybody, right? And also on a side note, right? Also found this off that the fact, right? The author of the original book, right, which was released in 1999, right? This was actually submitted to, I think it's some horror book awards, right? And swear to God, right? As much as the critics or the judges love the book, they feared about. Well, they had a fear of what would happen if that book were to go out, especially when kids read it, So they literally did not even declare a winner in that contest.
Oh wow!
He was technically the winner, but he just literally said, "Here's what, we're not going to declare a winner at all because if we pick Battle Royale as the winner, then more people will buy it, and then they're going to be brainwashed, right?" So it's kind of like a weird equivalent to like what the book like Anthony Burgess's A Clockwork Orange was, right? The book followed by the movie. They were afraid of what would happen if people were to read it, right? So it's that weird thing that took place too,
Well, yeah. Well, it's an interesting conversation because there's been this ongoing question in art of how responsible authors are, and I mean authors in a general sense, not just people who write books, but filmmakers as well, for imitators, right? I mentioned Stephen King earlier. He famously has a book that he allowed to fall out of print and is not asked print called Rage, which was about a young man who brings a gun to his high school and shoots people. That novel was found in the lockers of a couple different real life high school shooters, and King said, "I'm not putting this back in print. We're not reprinting this. I kind of like this. Clearly, I went too far. But on the flip side, there was the whole Natural Born Killers case."
Right.
Where it was the whole question of like this young, I think it was like a couple who'd gone on like quote unquote a copycat spree, and the whole legal question of do we hold Oliver Stone responsible for the case? And I think it's interesting because often in these cases, the context of the original movie is taken out because, like, yes, Battle Royale is about teenagers trying to kill other teenagers. But I think worrying about whether they're going to copy the film is taking away from the context that they are reluctant. That one of the things I find really impressive about the movie is that unlike a film like Hunger Games or unlike something like The Long Walk, these teenagers are given no time to prepare for the Battle Royale. They are literally the class is selected by the government, but they are not told that they will be participating until they wake up after coming back from what seems to be a normal school trip and find themselves in a room with a bunch of soldiers and are being told that they all have to, with explosive collars around their necks, being told they're all going to have to kill each other. And I think to me, that's one of the most striking things about the film. One of the things that I came away with is the fact that these teenagers clearly don't want to be doing this. Like some of them are. There's the one psychopath who deliberately tried to be in the event, and there was like a couple people who like rose to the surface and were like, yeah, definitely. Now I'm definitely going to, be part of this. Like, hell yeah, I get to kill my classmates. But for the most part, and some of the first teenagers to die are the ones who don't want to participate and they don't want to be involved, and it's horrifying and they don't know what they're doing. Like, I think about there's the young couple who throw themselves off a cliff. It just genuinely heartbreaking.
It was
heartbreaking.
Wow. I felt that. I felt that. Yeah.
Like very much like we don't want to participate in this. And then the fact it's like most good survival, most of the people who die at first are the people who don't want to do this. Like they're the people who are like, this is wrong, this is bad, I don't want to participate in this, I don't want to kill my classmates. So I think that taking the film out of that context and making it about teenagers who kill each other kind of misses the point that like this is about there's a huge amount of reluctance into it. And hell, you could even make the argument, and I'm not going into spoilers, but you could make the argument that some of the last people standing don't survive because they're really good at killing each other. They don't survive because they're the coolest and they know how to use a gun or how to use a sword or whatever. Like by the last people we have standing are not the people you would expect, because it's not just about teenagers who are really good at killing each other, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's true. They were merely lucky though. I mean, yes, they are the stars of the show, which you'll get into, but they were lucky though, just given what plays out over the 3 days on this island, right?
There's so many moments in the movie where they could have died, and I think the film does a really good job of establishing how no one is especially precious. Like there's so many characters you think are going to survive, or so many characters you think are going to do better than they are, who get killed pretty quickly, pretty unglamorously. Another one I think about a lot are there's the one group of kids, and you'll know the ones I'm talking about if you've seen the film, whose plan is to stockpile weapons in case anyone attacks them, but their plan is to lie low, work together, and get out of it. And they end up, it's what you were saying earlier about the petty high school bullshit. They get undone because there's some slight division within their own ranks. Someone does something stupid, and then they all turn on each other, which is like another moment of like, also, and this goes again to the whole thing of like the copycat, these kills are not fun. There are so many scenes in this movie where, you know, characters get killed and they're like whimpering or crying out or screaming in pain, and it's like, because they're actually mostly underage actors playing actual teenagers, and because this film is really well directed, most of the time when characters get killed, you don't go, "Ah, hell yeah." You're like, it's what I was saying earlier about like Schwarzenegger films. You're not sitting there punching this guy going like, "Hell yeah." You're wincing and you're cringing and you're like, "Oh, I didn't want that person." Like even the people you kind of want to get killed because they are antagonists, you find yourself feeling sorry for them because of the way in which they are killed, if that makes sense.
No, that's absolutely right? But yeah, just to wrap up with Masuko quickly, right? But then there's this flashback scene involving her that shows up around the third act, right? This, believe it or not, was actually taken out of the original cut. So in the special edition, it's there, right? Yeah, it's where you see her as a kid, and it's implied that
I know
her mom was being pimped out by this really scummy guy, but then the guy tries to have his way with her, and she pushes him down a flight of steps. So in other words, she's being conditioned to this very harsh world, that this movie presents, right? So you understand why literally every time she runs into someone, it's like, I don't trust you. It's either me or you. If I had to get one way or the other, sorry, you're going to get out of my way, right? So you could understand her mindset, right? That to me now leads to who is, in my opinion, the most complex character in this whole film. That will be Kitano. Former teacher to these kids, now this guy who willingly decides to work with the military in this really messed up, battle royale program, right? So, quick side note, right? The guy who plays him is Takeshi Kitano, right? Or Beat Takeshi as his nickname, right? My introduction to him, believe it or not, came in a little movie that came out in 2003 that I was fortunate to see called Zatoichi, which is a remake of the classic, samurai films of the same name from the 50s, which I own on Criterion through the box set. I own that shit. I love it, right? Yeah, just a little side note. I'm wondering why that 2003 movie wasn't on that box set. I don't know why. He's the same character. Whatever, right? But yeah, I knew about Takeshi before, right? But I thought, like, just seeing him here in this movie, though, he was so great to this film, right? And it's just basically because of how cynical he is, right? And I like how they just justify why he is the way he is, right? Because there's a moment earlier on where when he goes into school, normal, and all the kids are gone except for Noriko, right? Who would be the girlfriend of Shuya. So both of them technically are the stars of this film, right? But yeah, he comes in and all the kids, as you see in Trinidad, break beach or they duck school and just write on the board, oh, we don't care about school. We just decided not to come. And he's like, oh, wow, well, That's where we reach, boy. Okay. And then as he comes out, this one kid runs and stabs him by accident. Well, he's running, he has a knife in his hand and stabs him. And it's just how Kitano kind of like just composes himself, though. He goes by this nearby sink and he washes his hands. He try to wash the blood off of his shirt. Off his pants. I think he gets stuck in the leg. And you can't blame him for resigning, though, because like, wow, this is the conditions I had to deal with. But is the mere fact that he sides along with this very inhumane program, though, that adds a lot of detail to his character. It's like, yeah, why would you even do this in the first place? So, yeah, he is legit exacting his revenge on these kids, though. And the mere fact that it's his own class, though, his former class, though, that he's punished, that he's doing this punishment too, right? And this last point I'll make, right? Mad points, even though it's a very disturbing scene, mad points for him bringing in the body of their current teacher. Like, oh yeah, your teacher, he was against it, so yeah, we killed him. And then he show how the go out do this exaggerated zoom in on his corpse, and it's all bloody up. I was like, wow, Kitano, you motherfucker, you. I love this, but yeah.
Well, I was thinking about how it's not even just that he's getting revenge on these kids for being little assholes or anything. There's also this very strong implication that and this gets into the film's, this film's got a really interesting generational commentary. It's very much an implication that he has a very distant relationship with his daughter. And the implication, to me at least, is very much that, like, he is taking some of that frustration out on these kids as well. Like, it's also because, like, he's frustrated with them as students, but then also very much like he's having his own relationship with his daughter, and that's kind of complicated and messy. And as a result, he's kind of extrapolating and taking it out on just younger people in general, and again, when I talk about this film having a generational context, I think there's very much a pattern, an observable pattern in kind of social studies in particular, of older generations blaming younger generations for just problems in general.
Yeah, you're right. Mm-hmm.
I think like we're a generation of people that every now and again some news outlet will put out a think piece about how we killed the gold industry or diamonds or whatever, because we eat too much avocado toast, that kind of nonsense, right? Like very much like very much like a looking around at the world, seeing that things are not as great as it was when some of these people were younger, and deciding that it's the people who are now young, it's their fault, right? Like turning the next generation into scapegoats for the problems at hand. Essentially, you see this as well if you watch, not recommending it, but if you watch some of the like juvenile delinquency films of the 50s, and unfortunately I hate to tell the viewers at home, not all of them are as good as Rebel Without a Cause.
Oh yeah, I mean Rebel Without a Cause is the best, like easy. It
is. But for every Rebel Without a Cause, there were like 10 I Accuse My Parents, or oh goodness, what's that really awful one that Ed Wood wrote? The Violent Years, or these movies that are essentially these like, firmly middle-aged people in the 50s complaining about teenagers and saying that like they are bringing the world down with their crime and their rock and roll and their all this other stuff. What I love about Battle Royale is that the director is clearly, and assuming it's an accurate adaptation, I'm assuming the book is the same. I need to read the book. It's very much a criticism of that attitude, right? Of like scapegoating the younger generation for the problems of the world. Because there's very much an implication that, and I think it comes up a couple times in the little video they make the kids watch before they send them out to kill each other. There's very much an implication that this is a dystopian world, like some crisis happened and social order is kind of crumbling, and in order to preserve some semblance of order, the government has decided to scapegoat young people by selecting troubled schools and having them kill each other. So it's very much this criticism of this idea of when times are difficult and people in charge want to, like when people in charge want to establish order and they want to kind of address quote unquote real problems in society, the people they come down hardest on are young people, which I think is one of the things about the film that's like kind of its strongest. I'll probably bring this up a couple of times, but yeah, but this is probably the theme of the film that I think is the strongest aspect, is very much this idea of the youth being scapegoated for the problems of a society that they are only just now kind of coming to understand, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, I'm glad to see that we are on the same boat because I picked up on that theme as well, right? So
Yeah.
yeah, but two quick points before we move forward, right? One thing that instructional video always stood out to me, just because of the actress who does the instructions.
Good Lord.
It is one of the funniest scenes in the movie. I mean, funny in terms of pitch black humor because of her high pitched voice and the heavy makeup on her face, and just how cute she looks though. But she's basically talking about, hey, if you try to get those colors off, you die, blah blah. But just how she expresses it is so funny. I love that, right? Also, that moment with the one girl who's whispering, and then Kitano throws the knife at her and said, I thought I said no whispering. Those two moments always stood out to me, After the years since I saw it, those two moments stood out to me so much, right? And one other point as far as Kitano goes, right? Take note of his clothing. It looks very much like what a coach would wear. I love that there are moments where you have these breaks, right, in between the battle royaling, right, where he would announce the names of the deceased. And you'll talk about, these danger point zones are here, there, right? Take note of how he talks. It's very much like how a coach talks. It's always like, yeah, get out there, or we need to do this, we need to win this, So he's kind of, like coercing these kids to just finish the match, to just finish this game, basically, right? Not to slack off.
Yes.
So I love there's a moment where he says, you could take a break from killing to have lunch, whatever it is, right? It's very, very coach-like. I love that about that character.
Yeah. He's very, given the fact he's trying to get these teenagers to kill each other, he's remarkably, like, there's, like, it alternates because there's moments where it feels like he's very, I don't know. Like, there are these weird moments where it feels like he's almost a little laissez-faire about the whole thing. Like, he's much less invested. But, yeah, like, moments where he's just like, I can never interpret how genuine he is. I think that's one of the great things about that performance. I can never tell when he's being... There's a couple moments where I can tell he's being genuine, but when he's doing the announcements and everything, like, I don't know if he's, like, seriously trying to encourage them or if he's being the most sarcastic asshole you ever heard.
No, that's true, because how you would just say, number this person's name, number this person's name, just like, yeah, that's the name. So if you know who this character is, well, okay, sorry, well, he or she's dead. Sorry. It's kind of like that, but he just does not care. He does not care at all, right?
Yeah,
and one more point though, about Katana, right? His death scene, or at least that final moment that he has in the film, is one of the best death scenes I've ever seen in my life, because it just reflects the cynicism of the character. Like, he gets, not gonna see how he gets killed, right? But just like, oh, well, that happened. All right. But I still have to do something to piss myself off even more. So he makes a call, and then when he makes a call, it's like, that's when he finally dies. I love that. Like, he just can't accept his own fate. It's just like, you know what, I just need to blame somebody, so I'm just gonna make a call to a person. Okay, I'm gonna blame you. Right, the end. I love it.
I had a question for you. While watching this, were you also reminded of the films of Paul Verhoeven, like RoboCop, Starship Troopers, and stuff like that?
I was actually, especially with the larger than life characters as well, and also on a side note, I was reminded of A Clockwork Orange with the use of classical music, just from the opening up to the very end. Well, sorry, not to the end, because there's actually like a great little pop rap song that plays during the closing credits. But yeah, the use of classical music is very reminiscent of A Clockwork Orange. Yeah. I just love the fact that the show doesn't stop to give you backstories for all these 42 characters. Like, that's not the point of the show, right? We have like 2 hours roughly to work with. So, yes, some characters are meant to be victims. Like that one guy in particular who had this bulletproof vest. I love the fact that he's like, oh, haha, look at me, my bulletproof vest, right? And the second badass in the movie, Kiriyama, right? He's the tough guy that you mentioned, CC, the one who just... He just resubmitted himself to the tournament just because, right? He just loves to kill people. Yeah, he just jumps off a roof with a katana in his hand and decapitates the guy, though. And yes, it's kind of meant to evoke a, oh my god, this is so badass. But at the same time, it's like, wow, like this dude like just mercilessly killed this guy. Like, wow, right? And yeah, if there's one thing I really love about the show here is, like I said before, it has a sort of a slasher film kind of vibe to it, right? Where you are just sort of waiting for these characters to die, but at the same time, because they're so young and because they're so vulnerable, you don't want them to die, right? But at the same time, the show sort of plays back forward. Yeah, they're gonna die though. It's just a question of how and when, right? So it's just like a slasher film where, yes, admittedly, a lot of people like to watch slashers because it's like, yeah, I want to see how this character gonna die, especially characters that you hate, right? So I love that subversive nature of the show itself, right? I also love how the show plays with flashbacks as well. So like there's one involving a basketball game, right? And I would admit there are times during the film where, and I guess it's just a problem when it comes to watching films from different countries, especially like especially Asian films. Yeah, it's kind of hard to tell who is who. Like I guess like if I just knew these actors back beforehand, I would have been able to pick them out now. But I just love that you have these flashback scenes to indicate to you, oh, this is who this character is, and this is the relation between that person and somebody else, right? So I love that they just keep going back to this basketball game and not really sure why, right? And in the director's cut, in the special edition, there's three requiems, right? Three final scenes, if you will, right? But they call requiems, right? The first one involves that basketball game, and it's only when the smoke clears and there's the actual winner of the game, if you will. Yeah, you see a majority of these characters in that game. Either they are playing in the game, they are participants, or they're spectators. So I just love that. Just like, yeah, this was a one time in their lives where they were innocent, and now they're just thrown into this island to kill themselves and pretty much die. Though, like it just adds even more sadness to the film itself, right? There's also this rather unique thing that the film does, right? Where either lines that were either spoken or thought of would just be displayed on a black screen with as kanji. Like that's a very artistic moment, when you film. I really do like that, right? Like at first you're like, oh, okay, that's really interesting. But the more they play it, the more they use it, it's like, oh, I get what they try to show here. Because yes, there are certain points where it's a thought, something that isn't even said, right? So this, to me, now leads to what I think is the heart or the pulse of this movie, right? There are things that are left unsaid. So for nearly every act of violence or character beat or plot twist, there's always this question of why, right? So why did Kitano join the military in this program? Why are these characters being killed due to like petty shit, right? And to me, two scenes perfectly sum up the tragedy behind everything that we're seeing here, right? Because yes, from a visceral level, you can watch this as this gnarly action film, right? But there's this deep-rooted tragedy behind everything that you see here, right? So the first one involves Shuya, right, who was trying to escape the island. He actually leaves his girlfriend behind, but he jumps into the ocean. But then one of his friends comes and saves him from drowning, right? Sugimara. Sugimara, that's his name, right? Yeah, so Shuya is rescued, and he's brought into this lighthouse where there are 6 girls there, right? And unbeknownst to Shuya, one girl recognizes him as the one who killed, like, I think, like she was attracted to this guy, right? But you see earlier on that there was an accident, right? Because the guy kind of fell on his weapon, right? But she didn't know that. She just sort of found out that, oh, this guy is dead, right? But she blames Shuya. So while he is bedridden now, these girls are preparing lunch for this guy, and that one girl puts poison, and it's only after the fact that you realize that was the weapon that she was given, because earlier on they're each given some item or weapon, right? In her case, she was just given this small, like, jar, if you will, this small vial, if you will, of poison, right? And she puts it in the food. One of the girls just suddenly grabs the plate and eats from it, and she dies instantly. And everybody starts to blame each other. All them pull guns out and start firing shots or whatnot, right? And then, of course, Shuya wakes up and he's like wondering what the hell's going on, right? The one girl who put the poison in the first place, she's hiding, right? And underneath a table in the same room while her friends are getting gunned down, right? She's the only survivor. She opens up now, tells Shuya she's sorry, runs up to the top, jumps off and dies, right? And
Damn.
even though the show is admittedly melodramatic, right? I would argue that it needs to be melodramatic, not just because of the fact that
Yes.
it's kids, right? It's teens, right? But because of the nature of the show, right? It's very over the top, but you kind of need to add this sort of, how to say, grandiose nature to it all, right?
Yes.
So
That's
the
where the
melodramatic,
classical music comes
right?
in,
That's
too.
where the classical music comes into play, right? But it's how Shuya reacts it though that really hit me, because he doesn't know why all this happened. 6 girls died, and he has no clue why it happened. That is sad. That hit me, boy. I was like, wow. And then just when things get
Mhm.
even worse, that's when that gut punch, and that's one of many gut punches in the film, right? But that one in particular really, really hit me because the guy had no clue. He don't know what happened up to the end of the film. He has no clue why this happened, right? And then it leads to the guy who saved him in the first place, right? And he goes in and he's just looking around. He's looking for someone. And there's this one girl that he had the hots for when he was in high school. And she's just so scared shitless as to what's going on because remember the whole nature of the game is that, is kill or be killed, right? Poor girl pull out a handgun and empty the full clip on this guy. And then when she comes on, she's like, "Oh, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm
Oh,
sorry."
yeah.
And he's like, "Listen, I was always attracted to you ever since I was in school, And that's the last words that he say before she dies. Before he dies, sorry. And then she says, "Why did you tell me this when we were in school? Why are you telling me this now?" And as melodramatic as this moment was, I felt that too, boy, because again, it's just these
Listen.
unanswered questions. And again, even worse though, because she's like, what do I do? What do I do? And then Mitsuko come and just say, "Die." Block her. That's it. The end. Gut punch,
Well,
That was a gut punch. Wow.
Oh yeah. Well, this is what ties into the theme I mentioned earlier of the idea of scapegoating young people for the problems of society, because the film really, and you've highlighted this perfectly, the film highlights that it almost becomes a little ridiculous to say that these young people are to blame for the great ills of society or whatever, because like they don't know what's going on with their own lives. Like you have all these teenagers stumbling around, they like on this island, some are killing each other, some are not, they don't know what's going on. Like you highlighted the lighthouse sequence, which was the scene I was alluding to earlier, was one of my favorites in the film as well. Or even the whole bit where she's like, where the one girl accidentally kills the guy who turns out had a crush on her the whole time, and she's mad that he told her before he died, sorry. And just this whole, like, these are children. They are scared. They don't know what is going on. They're not, like, they're coming to grips with themselves. Like, their lives are motivated by very petty things. There's a lot of things that, like, as adults, we can sit here and go, that's not as important as you think it is. But like they themselves, within their own subjective reality, feel it's very important. And that's why I really think the film is a perfectly pitched melodrama. But it ties into this idea of like, why are we like, how can we take these kids that are like having all these interpersonal problems and who are so confused by everything happening and somehow come to the serious conclusion that it's their fault that this society has come unraveled.
Yeah, exactly. So, few things for you before we wrap up, right? So, this to me is like just the underlying sadness behind all. Is both kids and adults are just swept up in this socio-economic problem that there's no solution to. Like early on, they just tell you unemployment rates rise, and because of the juvenile delinquency that come out of it, they just decided to create this game to curb that problem. So instead of, and they think like that's how you're gonna solve the whole unemployment problem. Like no, that makes the problem worse, right? That to me leads to a great flashback scene that, believe it or not, was in the actual cut of the movie, and I'm glad it's still here, right? Where it cuts to Shuya, right, and his dad, because they say earlier on, where you saw earlier on that he commits suicide, right? But then there's this very painful moment of the two of them in a restaurant, right? And you could see the guy just trying to keep his composure, right? Like he's in this fancy restaurant with his son. It's like, we're supposed to enjoy him. They're supposed to be enjoying themselves, right? But he's like, "No, boy, but I'm gonna lose my job, and I know I just start feeling it." And he's angry. So every time a waiter comes, he's just always so aggressive towards them, right? I could just see Shuya just not having any of it. He just feels so depressed. He doesn't want to be there. He's leaning, he's lying down, he's basically leaning his head on the table. He's like listen, like Dad, you need help. You're not supposed to be here. You need help, right? At that moment, just really hit me as well, too, right? But yeah, at the end of the day, it's just really about everyone who's just roped into this problem, right? And I would say the same thing with Kitano. Even though he's exacting his revenge, he of all people feels like, like he just doesn't know how to solve this problem as well, right? Because, admittedly, he could have just stuck it out, He could have stuck it out with these kids, He could have been like Morgan Freeman in Lean on Me, for example, right? And just stuck it out with these kids and be a shining example of hope, right? But he just resigns because he just doesn't know how to deal with it, right? So he just reacts it in that way, right? That to me leads to a scene that I am glad is now added in the special edition of this movie. This is the final requiem of this movie, right? The closing scene, right? And this scene was also, well, when it's referenced in the film itself, it was also taken out as well, right? For pacing purposes, right? But I think that scene leads to what I think is the best way to end this movie, right? It's a flashback involving Noriko and Kitano. Because set up earlier on that they knew each other, right? Because remember, Noriko was the one who came in when everybody else left the class, and Kitano was there, right? And then as he came out, he got stabbed. But then Noriko took that knife, that bloody knife, and kept it for herself, right? So there's a scene that you see in the middle of the film where you're seeing them by this dam, right? But you're not hearing any dialogue, right?
Yes.
That scene comes back as the final scene in the movie, and you're hearing those lines of dialogue. And she says how, yeah, she feels no regret of taking that knife. She keeps it, right? She keeps it in her possession. There's a great moment in the end of the film where she actually goes back for that knife now and goes off with Shuya. Because yeah, ironically, they are blamed for the death of Kitano. It's like, oh, these are dangerous criminals and you need to look out for them. So yeah, they are on the run now, right? And it makes for a great way to end their arc, in my opinion, right? But yeah, going back to that flashback with Noriko and Kitano, right? When she says that, yeah, basically she wants to keep this a secret between them, right? Kitano asks, in this moment, what should an adult say to a kid? And then that line is shown in kanji on a black screen. And like, yeah, that's the message of the film right there. What should an adult say to a kid? When these adults are faced with these very troubling times and they know how these kids are reacting to it, right? What should they say to them? I think, in my opinion, with the Kitano character, he should have made a better effort. He should have been in these characters' lives. That he would have been the one fighting against this class being part of the program in the first place. But he left and he joins the enemy, right? So yeah, he becomes part of the problem now, right? So that's why his death is way more cynical and ironic, right? When you think about it, right? And how he reacted even more so, right? But yeah, that's to me is the message of the show, right? It's just these unanswered questions, right? There's nothing that's being done now.
Yes.
And these kids are trying to figure things out for themselves because their parents are going through the shit, so they don't know what to do. So it's like, here's what, well, since we can't rely on our parents, we got to figure things out. And the only ones they can rely on is themselves, right? So that's why the delinquency rises. And then the government's like, oh, well, now we fucked up, so here's what, okay, let's just do this program, right? But it's all built on fear, right? So that's why it kind of exists the way how it is, right? But again, there are no answers, and it's just these characters, especially kids, who are trying to figure it out, but there's no one there to help them, right? And yeah, that to me is really the message of this film, right? So
yeah,
that's to wrap things up, right? So even though you could argue that yes, this is that it's not a horror film in the traditional sense, right? It's more a societal horror film, as Ricardo says, right? But this is pretty much an example of a world, or I should say, of a future that should never become a reality. That should never ever become a reality, right? And the mere fact that it came from a guy, even though it's adapted from a book, right? It came from a guy from like Kinji Fukasaku, right? Who would have been probably in his 70s when he made this, because he died from pancreatic cancer. And I mean, he was making films since the 60s, right? I think it's either from the 50s or the 60s, right? But for this guy in his age, right? To tell this story that connects so much with the times, right? But just for a man like him to make a story like this, right? And just believe in it so much that he was willing to say, damn the censors, I'm gonna make this film, right? this guy who made these Yakuza classics, I'm gonna make this film, right? And yeah, make a masterpiece out of this is kind of inspirational to me, right? But just like A Clockwork Orange and just like Straw Dogs, the violence in the film is very visceral, it's very raw, right? It's very disturbing, but it's not done for the sake of violence, right? There's a point to be made by it, right? And the mere fact that it's done by kids too makes it even more unsettling, in my opinion, right? But there's a lot of depth, there's a lot of heart to the story as well. And yeah, it just made for a great film, right? I'll close this, right? To me, the real reason why I love this film so much though is because it came from Kinji, is because this is his final film, right? And because he believed in this so much, right? So I'll put it like this. This guy literally went out on a high note with this one. This guy took an AK-47, aimed it to the sky, let out a full metal jacket of bullets to the sky, and said, if this is going to be the last film that I make, I am going to go out on a bang. I'm going to give it my all. It's confrontational, it's controversial, it's visceral, it's violent, it's bloody, it's brutal, but there's heart to it, there's depth to it, there's longevity to it. And yeah, for me, not only this is one of the best films I have seen over the past 25 years, this is one of the best films I've ever seen, period. So for me, this gets a 5 out of 5, boy. See this movie before you die. Wow, talk about going out on your own terms. Because I don't just love this film for just the nature of it and the message of it, right? But the mere fact that it is this guy's swan song though, made me love this film even more, in my opinion though. Talk about a way to God. This and to me, this is why Quentin Tarantino loves this movie so much though, you know what I mean? Because I can imagine him, especially with him kind of wrestling in terms of what his final film should be. I think that he would love for his final film to be as explosive as movie was, in my opinion, right? But yeah, I absolutely love this film. This needs to be in my collection one way or the other. And slight spoiler, folks, as I said earlier on, this is going to be in my best of as far as best films that I have seen over the past 25 years. And I think I talked long enough, right? So, Ricardo, your final thoughts and rating. And I know you don't love it as much as I do, but what do you think of its legacy now over time?
Yeah. It totally hold up as again great social commentary and works as social horror, as they say. It holds up as its conceits. Great drama, builds good tension. Not a action movie per se, but it really works in the again good tension and good atmosphere. And yeah, I dug the hell out of it. It is a classic for a reason, as it is. I don't love it as much, but it's because of my exposure around it. Like again, if I saw it in earlier, I would have loved it a lot more. But that's about it. This is a great one. It is a classic, and it does hold up.
All right, and lastly, of course, CC, seeing that this is your first time, and wow, you were able to see this for its 25th anniversary. I can't even begin to imagine how stoked you were, in seeing this film for the first time, now for its 25th anniversary, right? So with that being said, your final thoughts, rating, and its reputation. Do you think it's deserved? Both the controversy and the acclaim. And how do you see this film holding up, after, years from now? What do you think?
Well, given that this film already holds up as well as it did for 25 years, I could easily see it still holding up. Because, I think one of the things about the film is that there's multiple dimensions to it. Because, as I have highlighted, and even in a couple ways I didn't get round to, this film is absolutely a masterpiece. 8+, 10 out of 10, 5 out of 5. Absolute banger. And one of the other things I think I've alluded to is I was surprised how good, because I have often found that there are some films that either they get talked about to death, if that makes sense, and so by the time you get around to them, you're like. So for me, I don't know if this is a controversial opinion, but Monty Python and the Holy Grail is a good example of that, where by the time you get round to it, all the best parts have been told you by other people, and you're like, well, I can kind of see why this is.
But that's a kind of strange case, because humor is the strangest self life. Some stuff does hold up, but other stuff don't hold up. And I was thought, I get why Monty Python is as popular as it is, but at the same time, a lot of it doesn't work for me. I get it. I get it.
Well, I think, yeah, it's one of those things where you're kind of left in that position of, I get
Right.
why people like this, and especially since I don't know what it is, but like comedy films in particular bring out this weirdly evangelistic streak in people where they kind of like
Right.
to they tell you all their favorite jokes to try and get you to go watch it, and then you go, well, you just told me the joke.
Right.
So there's a big part, because I spoiler discourse I think is interesting. I think some people take spoilers too seriously, but then I also think
Right.
some people just spoil stuff. But on the other hand, if there's one genre you don't want to spoil, it's comedy.
Yeah.
Because
and horror. Comedy and horror because of the shock scenario. Yeah.
Yeah, shock and surprise are two of the biggest aspects of it. And I think one of the other things that sometimes can hurt a film is when the people who really champion it for all the wrong reasons. Like, again,
that's the problem.
Until I watched this movie, I thought it was an action film. And I think that's why I kind of put it off as long as I did. If I had thought of it more as a horror film, I probably would have seen it sooner. Because, people like Tarantino and people comparing it to The Hunger Games and people talking about it in context of films like that and being like, well, I don't know if I'm in the mood for another, for Japanese Hunger Games. And you watch it, you go, this is a horror movie. This is a very different experience. But then despite that, it's still a movie that holds up. This is a movie that you can watch people discuss and talk about and hear people discuss and read essays and still find things in it that will appeal to you personally is kind of my argument. Like, it's very much a film that, like, it's one of those rare films that, like, no matter how often it is discussed, there's still a whole lot of stuff to mine in it, which I think is really interesting. Like, I haven't even touched on the idea, for example, of the film as how it works as a survival film. I've mostly talked about like the themes and things like that, but I think as like there's this whole other dimension to it where comparing it not to films like The Hunger Games, but comparing it to things like Cast Away with Tom Hanks, or comparing it to The Poseidon Adventure as a film about, or The Grey with Liam Neeson, where now it's about, like, putting aside the whole why they're there surviving, now it becomes a film about surviving. That's a whole other dimension to the film that I haven't even gotten into, which is a whole other way to appreciate it. And I think that it's a true masterpiece that can be evaluated from multiple directions, and you will still find new ways to talk about it. And then the third point, I also think that as time goes on, like, this film is already clearly influential to a lot of people. There are a lot of people who cite this movie as important, flag it as a classic, and who has inspired them as creatives. I also think it's a very good film as like a template for how to do this type of film right, if that makes sense. So I was very pleased. I haven't seen the film yet, but the Long Walk movie that came out this year, the film adaptation, looks like it takes a lot of cues from Battle Royale, like in a couple very key ways, which is very exciting to me. But it also tells me that, like, Battle Royale as a film continues to be very influential in that way. So, yeah, I think this is a film that deserves its place. It deserves its place in the canon of the great films of the 21st century, and I think it will continue. Stone Cold classic for me, obviously, and it even, like, as a critic, I want to champion this and flag this for people and celebrate. And obviously, I want to go and watch more of this guy's films, because I actually haven't seen very many other films by this particular director, but now I want to go backwards. Like, now I want to go into his filmography and be like, oh, now I want to watch Battle Without Hope or Glory and, films like that. Like, I want to go back and check those out, because this is a damn good introduction to a filmmaker. And that's all as a critic. And then even as a creative, there's so many cool ideas and ways just ways in which this film is inspiring, and ways that this film figures to talk about difficult subjects that are very exciting as a creator. And so it's just a film that vibrates with a very creative energy. It is a harrowing viewing experience, and it's a film that should disturb you. It should shock you. It's a film that you should afterwards be kind of sitting for a while and being like, man, I remember all these bits that were upsetting or disturbing, but that's what a good horror film should do. So yes, all of that to say, I was pleasantly surprised to sit down with Battle Royale and discover that not only did it live up to the hype, but it exceeded some of my expectations for it as a film.